Hello and welcome to this episode of B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin, and this episode is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. Testimonial Hero enables businesses to accelerate buyers' journeys by closing trust gaps between them and their audiences with strategic, high-quality video testimonials. On this episode, I'm joined by Kate Hammitt, who is the CMO at Splash, and we're going to be chatting about events as an everyday strategy. Hey, Kate, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dustin. Great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about events, but not just events, more specifically about, using smaller events more frequently rather than focusing on the large one, some of the shifts in 2023 and then getting more to your content from events. I do want to kick it off at that first part, though. I mean, you mentioned before we talked about using everyday events throughout your whole buyer's journey, which is a super interesting concept. So let's just dive into that and maybe explain what you were thinking on that side of things.
Sure. So, when people think about events and your pipeline, obviously an event has a different purpose and you need to be considering your strategy, whether it's top of funnel, you're trying to promote your thought leadership, you're trying to promote brand awareness, you're, promoting your category and ultimately trying to potentially do even, larger events, to a specific audience. And then as you go through the pipeline, events can really accelerate, product-led conversations, your content changes. And then as you get closer to, a closed one, portion of the pipeline or with customers, your content changes, the intimacy changes. You might be wanting to do in person as opposed to a webinar. You might be thinking about, how you can bring together networks or communities, throughout the pipeline that can be relevant in various contexts. So just thinking about the whole flywheel, the customer flywheel and the buying cycle, how you weave in-person events, virtual events, hybrid opportunities, and then your content, and tying that into your strategy. There's really a place for events at every portion to really influence or in some cases drive, a net new opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a good call it because I think people, especially not from field marketing,
Mhm.
probably think events and they think Dreamforce, inbound, these giant get a booth in a sea of booths. And they have their place as well, totally.
Mhm.
But that is a different beast than these smaller everyday events, right? Which are, as you said, a lot more personal and a lot more community building.
Mhm. Yeah, and when you think about what the marketer is challenged with today, if there are almost 30 touch points now, depending on what research you're reading, that we have to drive in an impactful way to accelerate a buyer through the pipeline. So I often think, how are you getting those 27 touch points? It could be a flagship event, it could be a conference, but how are you creating that connection? How are you creating that impact? How are you articulating, your brand impact to the buyer and, having that relationship? So that's where events come in pretty well. Obviously, reading a piece of content is one thing, but interacting with your peers at a dinner that was facilitated by an organization endears you to that organization is a really nice way to connect and get that thought leadership. So that's one of the ways that smaller events, small is really relative depending on the organization. Their small event could be 200. Others could be, a group of 5, peers around a table. So it really is relative, but it's important to think about your brand touch points and the buyer's journey and how you're utilizing events.
Yeah. So as you start mapping this out, like you said, there's getting net new business, helping accelerate pipeline, close more deals, the retention side, and just building advocacy with customers. And then there's also the layer of in person, hybrid, recurring, online. It's a lot to figure out where to map all this. So let's say you map out your buyer's journey. How do you decide where to focus and kind of what type of events might resonate the most?
I think that's where testing comes in. I mean, obviously, being close to the way I like to do is to do it is really to be understanding of your customer. You got to understand your buyer. You got to meet them where they are, as we all know. So there's some kind of educated guesses to be had through those conversations and direction. And then really having a platform and an infrastructure that allows you to see are my webinars really accelerating, pipeline in this way when I get get a prospect to come to one event, two events, three events, you often see, an increase in revenue, either, from an ACV perspective or, you know, minimizing the buying cycle, sales cycle. So there are ways to measure, see what part of your and then you need to take in external factors. I mean, right now, attendees, there's such a high opportunity cost that we all have now for events, for in-person events, and going to certainly large conferences. But we live in this remote paradigm. People have shifted locales. What is field marketing is sometimes going through our heads as we're thinking about how people have dispersed and not necessarily around the HQ as they were in 2019. And organizations have certainly figured this out, and there's been a rise in, hybrid events and the opportunity to share your content, through virtual modalities. And that's been super powerful. And then thinking about when you do want to bring someone in person, I think the decision tree for a lot of attendees is around, who can I network with there? What's going to be that in-person value? Or could this be a virtual event? It's kind of like, could this meeting be an email? Could this event, just be, content that I get, within the screen versus needing to go in person, taking that travel budget to get there. So I'm always trying to be mindful of the opportunity cost for the attendee and making sure that the outcomes that I'm trying to get to and the results that we're trying to produce, making sure that our tactics, kind of line up with that and the opportunities that we're providing attendees to engage.
For sure. I think 2 points you mentioned there are, the travel cost and the budget. And I think most marketers, maybe depending on the industry a bit, but we're all a little weary of 2023, maybe being a bit cautious. And
Hmm.
that's an easy place for some to cut, right? Is
Hmm.
one part of it.
Hmm.
And then the other side of this just could be how I view which events I would attend in person versus remote is for me, is it passive or is it active? If it's
Hmm.
passive, someone educating, going through slides, I'd rather not travel or go in person. If it's
Hmm.
active and I'm having conversations and it's a roundtable or fireside chat, that's enough to spur me. So is that something you've seen as well? Like that shift more towards interactive events really drive people?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's exactly what we've seen, both from our customers who are, producing a lot of events and getting a lot of attendee data and feedback,
Yeah.
as well as for our own experience as an event marketing company.
Okay, that's good to hear that I'm not the only one out there thinking that. So that's great to hear. And then I guess the other, it's a popular topic that when I hear the word, I don't know how to feel about it, but the whole like influencer marketing or micro influencer side
Mhm.
and tying that into events, I feel like we're seeing that a little bit more, right? Like
Mhm.
bringing in someone who actually really knows their stuff on a topic and kind of building the event around a person sharing their
Mhm.
viewpoint.
Mhm.
So I'd love your thoughts there and maybe what you see changing, growing on that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an incredible engagement tactic right now that I feel like B2B always, takes elements of B2C,
Yeah.
a few years later. So that's one, great example of the latest engagement du jour. And I think it's a really interesting way to promote. I mean, we're constantly looking at, where those channels are going to light up and how you can, influence your buyer and make it worth their while. So I think the influencer from a B2B perspective needs to have obviously those chops that are going to connect with your ICP, and we all know how to kind of identify those folks, and then run that thread through the event, and be able to kind of give some sort of thread after the event, getting that influencer into your community to answer questions, or making sure that those takeaways really leave artifacts for the attendees that are coming for that influencer, as opposed to it being, one and done of just, at that moment in time at the event.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the built-in built-in audience that you might not have. So say you're a smaller company and you don't have a giant email list or people who engage and actually go to events, you get that side. But I do like the point of threading it throughout and having it be interactive rather than this is our keynote speaker we spent $60,000 on for this giant event,
Mm-hmm.
actually tying it together. The other one I want to talk about a little bit is what to do after the event. And you kind of hinted at it, I think, a
Hmm.
bit in that last question, but I feel that's something I've struggled with even for webinars back in the day. Like, what is the follow-up plan? What is the next step? How do you continue to provide value? So would love your thoughts and maybe some tips and tricks there.
Yeah. It's a really important part of, of the event, what you do after. And oftentimes once as event people produce the event, you're so excited, you send the thank you email and the recording and it's on to the next.
Yeah.
I think a really um, smart way of looking at the event is, your content creation moment. How can you, repurpose what occurred at the event across your various channels? How can you, after the event, a lot of times we like to have, kind of a virtual session or a networking session or just spin off groups, come join, this kind of fireside chat after the event to really dig into, event ROI or, join this to talk about content or whatever the topic is. And giving attendees a chance with, other subject matter experts to dig in more, to have those more in-depth conversations, to get their questions answered. A lot of times, as I, mentioned, just getting the questions that come up in your chat, in your Q&A, poll responses, any sort of content shared, pulling that into your community after and kind of rolling that out with a specific cadence, all related to the theme of your event, all kind of, uh, adding to the foundation that was laid at the event, but giving people an opportunity to continue to digest and have that conversation and doing that in channels that, make the most sense for the attendees. And a lot of times we're doing that on the fly. Where would you like this? Running a poll. Is it in the community? Is it via email? Is it on LinkedIn? And making sure that we are, pushing out the artifacts that are created in events and making whatever workshop that we did, kind of live on afterwards.
Yeah, I really like that idea of keeping the thread going from one event to the other and kind of having spin-off events.
Hmm.
Because when I hear repurposing content, I think more, does this go into a post or a video that we host somewhere and use as an ad for, to generate demand or further down the funnel? But I think that spinning off into almost micro events off your event
Hmm.
is really interesting. And I'm probably going to steal that idea and try it as we start doing things.
Please do. It's been really interesting to hear, the layers deeper that you go and we take the conversations and the feedback and the questions from those and
Yeah.
loop that in. So I sort of consider it one continuous feedback loop. Is there a groundswell for a certain topic or questions or struggle or challenge and unpacking that and then making sure that we're using that as a part of our content creation moving forward.
Yeah, like you mentioned, there's so many different touch points that someone will have to have before they buy, or even just to build affinity with the brand. I feel there
Mhm.
has to be multiple. And
Mhm.
so the more you can do that and pull them back in, super important. And
Mhm.
then we touched, I think, on a few topics here around this, but what else do you see coming down the pipe in 2023 for field marketing? Anything new you think people are going to be trying or that you're kind of curious to test out?
Yeah, I think, we're thinking about really a holistic buyer's journey and how do we create continuity for, our buyer, for our customers through the different digital opportunities and then in-person opportunities that we have. Mm, and doing that in a way that isn't draining resources and is
Yeah.
cost effective, just given the do more with less environment that we are all in. And I think the opportunity to mm, we're trying to work smarter around, how we're directing our prospects throughout the buyer's journey and making those impactful moments and making them a brand experience. And so, how that comes about as an example, doing more intimate events where our our buyers and customers can connect on, their challenges. We're not necessarily experts in every industry. So how can we gather those minds and put them to work around the challenges that they might be sharing and having, you know, and helping them make those connections to get better at what they're doing, using that for brand impact because it's facilitated by our organization, but we're not trying to say that we know everything about the challenges that our customers and buyers are having. And then, related to flagship events or these larger conferences, how can we, create moments that provide a little bit of lift or life? What is typically a slog. One of the
Yeah.
things that we've been working on is just wellness in the events industry. How can we help event planners put the mask on first? How can we ready them for what is a very long day of execution at a conference? So thinking about ways that we can stand out there as opposed to doing your basic sponsorship, your drinks and dinner, your cocktail event. What are ways that you can really start to y- just make life a little bit easier for the people that you serve and helping them in this time? So we're trying to think about, particularly in H1 of 2023, coming to our events with that type of approach of how can we help, how can we partner, how can we facilitate our customers and our buyers getting better at what they do and being a catalyst for great conversations.
Yeah, I really like that approach to, the large flagship events because
Mhm.
for a while it was kind of an arms race for biggest booth, biggest, most visible, get
Yeah.
people there. And it got a little out of hand. And maybe I
Mhm.
was just jealous because I didn't have the money for those giant extravagant booths.
Yeah.
But it is kind of cool to see it flip that way. And I think especially on the customer retention side, which to me is the other, not even trend, but big fact of the coming year is do more with less, like you said,
Mhm.
and retain and hopefully upsell customers are the two big ones.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good thing that you're pointing out is, really focus on the customer or prospect
Mhm.
at those large events rather than it always being net new, let's get eyeballs, right? Like make the
Mhm.
customer feel special.
Mhm. Yeah. And help them workshop their issues and kind of get them closer to a win than they were, before you got involved. So that's how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Well, that was as someone not from field marketing and not have done a lot of event marketing, super
Mhm.
insightful for me. They helped me a bunch. If our listeners want to learn more, connect, where should they reach out to you?
Yeah, well, my company is splashthat.com, so you can visit us there. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Kate Hammitt, and would love to connect.
Awesome. I'll include those links. And Kate, thanks again.
Thanks, Dustin.
Thanks for joining me on this episode. My key takeaway was the idea of spinning off smaller events from a larger one. It's just a great way to get a steady stream of event ideas and also a solid way to generate content ideas for your team. Additional benefit there is it shows you're listening to your customers and really expanding on the topics they want. So if you enjoyed this episode, please click subscribe or leave us a review, and I'll be back every Tuesday with a new episode.